There is one hormone in your body that predicts cancer growth, recurrence risk, and even how well you'll respond to treatment. And it's not estrogen or progesterone, it's insulin. We're talking about cancer here, not diabetes. When insulin is high, cancer grows. When insulin is low, cancer struggles to survive. And the wild part? The test that measures it costs $10, and almost no one is ordering it. Today, Dr. Marianne Martin is going to show us all how to lower insulin so you can make your body a cancer hostile environment. That applies if you're actively in treatment or years into survivorship. This is about changing your metabolic terrain so cancer has nothing to feed on. You'll learn the post-meal movement hack that can drop your blood sugar by 50 points, hostile environment, and why an A1C of 5.6, even though that looks kind of normal, is a wake-up call to take action. So let's take back control down at the cellular level. This is Kicking Cancer's Ass, bringing you the stories, the strategies, and the science that return your power one episode at a time. Today, we're going to talk about something that most people don't even know about and how we can change the cancer trajectory with glucose management and hormone. So we're bringing back Dr. Hormone Hacker, Dr. Marianne Martin, who's going to translate the science into power. Marianne, it's so great to have you back.
I'm so glad to be here, Joelle. I'm excited for our conversation.
When did you start to see the connection between glucose insulin resistance and cancer for yourself, for your patients? And how did the insight, which you're going to share with us, change how you're approaching care?
Well, I started having a heightened attention towards this because I do care for many people who have cancer, but also prediabetes and diabetes. So I dove into the literature and I was actually astounded to find the deep connection between glucose and cancer because glucose doesn't just feed our muscles and our brain, it also feeds cancer cells. And insulin is the hormone that brings glucose into the cells. But when we have very elevated insulin levels for long periods of time due to excess refined carbs like white bread, white potatoes, and of course, all the added sugars from cookies and ice cream, when insulin stays elevated like that, it becomes a signal for growth. So think of insulin like a fertilizer. Use a little bit, great. Use too much, you're going to have some dangerous weeds start growing. And we know that studies show that people with high insulin levels actually have a higher frequency of getting cancer, but also having faster tumor growth. And so this is a very important thing to control. If we control insulin, we can possibly determine who gets cancer, how fast it spreads, and it also affects how you're going to respond to treatment. And this is a very, very important connection.
I was cared for at a world-class National Cancer Center, Comprehensive Cancer Center hospital. I don't think glucose was mentioned once. And I have elevated A1C. I'm not pre-diabetic, but it's certainly not anywhere near where we want to be. How do we bring this glucose conversation into the conversation? Like, how do we get more tactical here?
Well, thankfully, this is a great start. And thank you for having this forum so that everyone can start learning about more and more connections to how we can prevent cancer and continue staying in remission. And I do believe that we're going to find out more and more ways of how glucose and insulin specifically are the root of probably 80% of chronic disease and inflammation. And it's something where I I tell patients all the time, look, you want to change the way that you think about sugars because I had to. After I saw this connection, I no longer treat patients where I'm looking at glucose and insulin as just a pre-diabetic issue. It is a metabolic terrain issue because where your metabolic health is, the environment that you're creating in your body is going to determine if you get cancer, how fast it spreads, and whether you stay in remission. And so the goal is, let's keep the glucose, the insulin, and the inflammation as low as possible so that we make that environment as unfriendly to tumor growth as we can.
So Dr. Lise Alschuler was on the podcast and she spoke about creating a inhospitable cancer microbiome, which I think is the same thing you were saying. So
Yes.
again, how does one bring this up with their provider? What are we supposed to say? Hey, oncologist, are you testing my blood sugar, my fasting blood sugar? And if we find out it's elevated, what are we supposed to do about it while we're in treatment or as survivors?
I think it begins with being able to educate ourselves and then showing our health care providers some grace. I was never taught the connection between how cancer can grow in an environment where insulin is left unchecked. When your listener listens to this podcast and they start bringing this information to their oncologist, to their primary care doctor, and just say, I just happened to listen to a podcast about the connection between glucose, insulin, and cancer. I would love to be tested for glucose, and we'll talk about the better measurement than even glucose, but I would like to start checking for this just so that I can see where I lie in my risk. And I do feel that, and this is just me personally, when patients bring me information, I never am in that, place where I'm on a pedestal. Being educated, knowing what the data shows, bringing that to your healthcare provider, and just by doing that, your healthcare provider may now be able to have a conversation with the next person who's going to help them. So it is a joint effort on both ends.
What are the ways someone who isn't diabetic, someone who just has, and I do want to know what's the better test, but someone who has a high A1C or you have some of these markers, what's on the menu as possibilities? I assume there's lifestyle changes that are about diet and exercise.
There's no debating that there's a connection between glucose, insulin, and cancer.
Okay. And is that JAMA? Is that like the New England Journal of Medicine?
It's JAMA, it's New England Journal, it's endocrinology, it's all of the major magazines.
Research journals.
Yes,
yeah.
Exactly. So here's where we have to start. I would argue that there are many people who are listening right now who have prediabetes and don't even know it. And the reason is because they are only being tested with glucose and possibly an A1C.
So what should they be tested with?
So the $10 fasting insulin test is the single most powerful predictor of early insulin resistance. And it is checked in less than 10% of the time. And where we're sitting right now is 100 million Americans, that's 1 in 3 people, currently have prediabetes, and 80% don't know they have it.
And if you're in that 1 of 3, the die isn't cast. You have choice at this moment.
Absolutely. Which is why I wrote the Type 0 Diabetic book,
right.
Is because this is your golden opportunity to actually reverse it and make sure that you never become a diabetic. And the earlier that we work on this, the easier it is. If you wait until your A1C is 6.3, which is almost diabetic, it is going to take many more radical changes than if your A1C is at 5.7. Now, I would argue that even when your A1C is 5.6 and there is no red flag on the paper, there should still be a red flag going on in your brain that I am really close to being pre-diabetic. And this is my wake-up call to change some things around.
It is November 10th, 2025, when we are recording this. And it is a momentous day for women and hormone replacement therapy. What do you
Yes.
think about the announcement today? What does it mean that the black box label is being removed from hormone replacement therapy and it's available to women?
It means that the next 20 years of women's health is going to change radically because we've been basically having our hands tied as providers in following the black box and wanting the most safe way to care for women. And it's been outdated for some time. And there have been a lot of female physicians in particular working towards this day. And I'm just so excited for all the women who are going to be able to now have an open and honest conversation with their providers and finally be given all the options in a way that isn't fear based and is more science based.
Yes. And one of the things that Secretary Kennedy did say in his remarks was the WHI study from 2002 actually was broadly misinterpreted. And there is a safety consideration about starting hormone replacement therapy within the first 10 years of menopause.
Actually, the safest time to start is within those first 5 years.
Right.
And so we were missing the boat for so many women who still have menopausal symptoms. And it's never too late, but it is a very nuanced conversation once you're 10 years postmenopausal.
Yes, I'm in that category. It has been a interesting journey into the cardiovascular implications of early menopause, but that is not our conversation today. Today, I want to talk about glucose and cortisol and A1C. So, you talked with us about your own journey, discovering you were pre-diabetic, all the generations of your family with diabetes. Let's move that now to cancer. So, 1 out of every 3 people is pre-diabetic, doesn't know it. A1C is a measure of inflammation. Cancer is considered an inflammatory disease. So, what does managing this insulin resistance and taking the bull by the horns and saying the die isn't cast, how many metaphors can I use in one sentence? Taking action based on this information, what could that mean to cancer recurrence rates?
So let's start from the beginning, which is there are many people who may need to undergo chemo, radiation, etc. And we know that the nausea that they can experience is going to possibly force them to have a very limited diet.
Mm-hmm.
Crackers, toast, bland carbs. The problem is that we need to outsmart this. Knowing, first of all, that undergoing chemo and radiation is a huge stress to the body,
Mm-hmm.
not just physically and mentally, but metabolically.
Surgery
You've
too.
got, yes, exactly. So you've got inflammation, you've got the chemo, the radiation, you've got all your stress hormones firing. This is all causing glucose to be dumped more into the bloodstream. And then on top of that, you're putting all of these carbs with that. And I know a lot of people drink ginger ale when
Mm-hmm.
they're nauseous. So, in knowing that all of this is contributing to that milieu that is helping the cancer to grow, we have to think of ways to get around it. You may actually have to also have steroids on
Mm-hmm.
board.
Mm-hmm.
And there have been multiple studies that have shown that high dose steroids, which is prednisone 60 milligrams a day or higher, it can increase your glucose by 50 or more points. And from the day that you stop the steroids, your sugars don't go back to normal. It can take 4 to 6 weeks for the sugars to come back to normal. And yet, we know that in a third of patients who require steroids, they go on to develop permanent diabetes. So, this is the conversation that the oncology team needs to have with patients before treatment even starts. And if I had my way, day one from the workup for cancer is going to include fasting glucose, insulin, A1C. Before someone starts steroids, they're also getting a repeat glucose, insulin, A1C, and 6 weeks after to make sure it has come back to normal.
There are antiemetics. So the concept that you have to suffer with massive nausea, I mean, do they work for everyone? I know, for example, like Zofran didn't work at all for me, but Apripant, otherwise known as Emend and Cinvanti, that stuff's magical. So a 3-day nausea block means you don't actually need to eat saltines. So I think your point that this is a conversation and you as the patient are in the conversation and there is no singular path because everybody's body is different and the way we respond to things is different. Let's move to the news of November 10th. Women
Yes.
have been told for the last 25 years that hormone replacement therapy increases cancer risk. It's not true.
Well, and a lot of us female providers would like to say that if this women's health initiative was a study done on men and testosterone, would have got overturned within a year of the misinterpretation of the results for decades since the Women's Health Initiative. We have been, and I included, we have been counseling women that it may not be safe for them to be on hormone therapy because of cancer risk. And that puts women in a position where they feel it's safer to just endure the symptoms of brain fog and sleep loss and fatigue and belly fat. But now we know that studies are showing that that metabolic chaos of untreated menopause also increases cancer risk.
Right.
And so, as an endocrinologist, I've never been the type of person to say automatic no to hormones. But what I do feel is important is let's get your metabolic health optimized first. Because there's two things that are very important to do. We have to control the insulin because insulin helps with the hormone signaling of hormone therapy. When you have high insulin levels, you're not going to have the proper signaling. Number two, inflammation blocks some of the receptors of the hormones even coming and doing their magic. So when we can control insulin and inflammation, it helps the hormone therapy become more effective. And then we don't need to use such a higher dose, and then it becomes safer overall.
Well, and you mentioned it actually seems to lower a lot of the cancer risks
Mm-hmm.
and lowers the bone density issue, which, you know, more seniors I think die from a hip fracture than, really you should ever be thinking about, but that's because of bone density.
Mm-hmm.
And, near and dear to my heart, and pun dual entendre intended, the cardiovascular implications, particularly if you are a younger woman who went through menopause early because you had treatment for cancer. You're
Mm-hmm.
not talking about, oh, I'm in my mid 50s and, hopefully I'm going to have another 40 years, but you're talking about being in your 30s. What are the implications of starving the body of those hormones for an extra 20 years?
Oh, it's terrible. I mean, as far as we know the effect to the heart, to the bones, to your skin. Women start losing their libido in their 30s or 40s. That's criminal.
I
Um,
agree.
and so now, you know, and it's not always that hormone therapy is going to be the choice that you want to make, even if it is a possible option. Thankfully, we do have other options available. You can do a microdose of a vaginal estrogen cream.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And here's the other thing, the foundation before even starting hormone therapy, I'm really going to continue to harp on this, is we have to make sure that our metabolic health is as fit as possible, which means being on a Mediterranean or low glycemic index diet, making sure that we are doing strength training at least 3 times a week so we're not losing muscle mass, making sure that we're also doing core exercises so that we're mobile and we're not prone to falling. If we don't combine a really solid nutrition plan with exercise, it doesn't matter what hormone therapy or not you do, it's not going to have the most beneficial effect. So it has to be multifactorial.
You mentioned that one of the things you think is a good idea for the after or before is continuous glucose monitoring, particularly for people who have finished their cancer treatment and they're now feeling like they can return to whatever normal is, and they want to take control of their metabolic health.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a little more about what you think people would learn if they wore a CGM, and what patterns might surprise them and what that might encourage them to try and do differently?
Here's what I love about CGMs. They are the only tool that makes metabolism that feels very nebulous, and it turns it into visible motivation. Because within 30 days of wearing a CGM, I always hear the feedback, usually within a week, from patients. I never knew that my sugars responded like that. So they have real time effects of what sleep, stress, and meals do. And so they might sit down for a bowl of oatmeal for breakfast and their sugars go up 50 points after breakfast. Huh, note to self. Or they could be sitting on the couch watching Netflix at night, having a couple of handfuls of pretzels, and their sugars go up 80 to 100 points. Interesting. But on the other hand, they are always shocked when I ask them to take a walk after dinner, 10, 15-minute brisk walk. Their sugars are back down to normal and they're always amazed. So getting to know how your body reacts to food, to stress, to exercise, I am all about gathering data because I can talk to someone until I'm blue in the face, but until they see the data, they're not going to be motivated to do anything. They see one time that they have rice at dinner and it skyrockets 80 to 100 points, they're going to think twice about having rice again for dinner.
So I really want the CGM apps because I've tried it a couple times and it turns out, you know what I've learned? I'm a terrible recorder of the food I eat. Like, I'm horrible. And I want it to say, like, ding, 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 your sugar went up. And then say, Joelle, what did you eat? Like, what did you just eat? Because I'm like, if I have to wait to the end of the day and I'm looking at it, I'm like, what did I have? When did I have it? So for whoever's developing these apps, I'd like it to be
Interactive.
a
Yeah.
little more proactive here. Like, we see a spike. What did you eat? What did you just drink? Anyway, all right. So let's talk about fasting insulin. What is a fasting insulin test? Why isn't everybody doing it?
I was never taught about even drawing a fasting insulin test in medical school.
And what's different about a fasting insulin test versus, you go to your blood work, and at least for me, they say, have you been fasting? I say, yes.
So, a fasting glucose, which is the most common test that is ordered, is no different than a Polaroid snapshot of your sugar at that moment in time.
Okay.
And so let's say that you drove to the lab and you were almost in a car accident. Well, your stress level is going to be quite high. Your cortisol is going to be spiking, which causes your sugars to go up, and your glucose might be higher than it should be. And in another situation, I have had patients who, before they know that they're getting blood work for me, they'll fast for as long as they can. They'll stop eating at 5 p.m. because they want their blood work to look as good as possible. And that can work.
Mm-hmm.
So the insulin is a more accurate measurement of really what's going on at the pancreas level, not at the cellular level where glucose is entering the cell immediately at that moment. When you're asking, first of all, for an insulin to be drawn, you also may have to educate your healthcare provider not to follow the reference range that comes back on the lab, because the correct insulin that you're shooting for to remain healthy and not insulin resistant is an insulin less than 9. And that's on a fasting sample where you're fasting 8 hours or more. So if you really want to be a rock star and make sure that you never ever have diabetes, you're actually shooting for an insulin of 5 or lower. But 9 or less keeps you out of the prediabetes insulin resistance range.
So we should be going to our doctors. Like I get labs every 3 to 6 months. And I should say, can we add fasting insulin? And when they
Yes,
say, well, we do a fasting glucose, I say what?
you're going to say, I have listened to a podcast, which was amazing. And that podcast shared that an insulin level actually predicts future diabetes 7 to 10 years earlier than a glucose. And I would like to be as proactive as I possibly can.
Okay. And it's an inexpensive test.
It's $10.
Right. So please just add it to my orders. And we're really looking for 5 or lower, but 9 or lower is okay.
Correct.
I'm going to add this to my panel that's coming up and, I'm going to
Good.
ask.
Good. But while we're on labs, let's be very complete. If I could have my dream set of labs to really look at inflammation and glucose and insulin risk and all of that, you're also going to want to add an early morning cortisol.
Mm-hmm.
And a cortisol is most accurate between 6 and 8 o'clock in the morning. Your highest cortisol peak is usually 6 a.m., as long as you're not a shift worker. So if you wait until 9 a.m., your cortisol has already dropped 40% from that peak 6 a.m. time. But when you're checking between 6 and 8 a.m., if the cortisol is 10 or higher, it doesn't mean that you have insulin resistance, but it's definitely a prompt for you to have your insulin checked.
Okay.
In addition, you may have already had a HSCRP, or highly sensitive C-reactive protein. It's a marker of inflammation. When it's elevated, it can mean that there's inflammation just in a targeted area like the heart, or it could mean that it's systemic, it's everywhere in your body. But also, let's not forget, thyroid hormones
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
influence not only metabolism, but also cell growth. So those are all of the tests that I would include in a cancer workup, as well as a well check. What you really want to do is have a conversation with someone who knows thyroid disease very well and looks at you as a person and not just the numbers, because you might feel fine with a TSH of 2.5. Someone else feels absolutely fatigue, brain fog. They are actually having constipation. They're having a whole host of symptoms, and nobody would even look at thyroid on the radar because it's normal on the blood work.
Okay. So you start with your primary care doctor, and if they don't specialize in thyroid and thyroid disease, might need a referral to an endocrinologist.
Yes.
Let's move into our 5-question lightning round. Complete the sentence. If I could change one thing about how oncologists manage their patients' metabolic health, it would be
I think you already can guess this. You're going to have a fasting
insulin.
Yes.
Say it together, everyone. We all want fasting insulin tests. Okay. What's the biggest myth about hormone therapy and cancer that you wish you could bust once and for all?
Well, I think a lot of it was busted today,
Yeah.
November 10th. I think the biggest myth is that it's an automatic hard no. It is a nuanced conversation, but my most important encouragement is make sure that you're metabolically fit first before you start hormone therapy.
That makes sense. This one's going to be case study like. Someone has just finished chemo, their A1C has crept up to 5.8, they're terrified of becoming diabetic on top of everything else, and they've been told to worry about their cortisol. So, what's a dangerous cortisol level, and what should this person do?
So, a cortisol level that needs to be evaluated more seriously is a fasting early morning cortisol of 10 or higher.
Okay.
Many people don't require fasting. The reason I would like it to be fasting is I don't want the food or beverage that you're drinking to possibly spike the cortisol and give us an inaccurate reading. Now, when it comes to managing an A1C that is in the pre-diabetic range or even in the diabetic range, it really goes back to smart hacks like the following. Number one, focusing on what I call smart carbs. The definition for me of smart carbs, it's got 3 grams of fiber or more. So you're going to have whole grain bread. You're going to choose a protein pasta with fiber. It's not that you can't have carbs, but you're going to have it in a smarter way. You're also going to have it earlier in the day when your pancreas is ready to process it. We know in multiple studies that people who are having carbs later in the evening are going to have higher glucose, which leads to higher insulin, which leads to that more toxic environment for cancer to possibly grow. And then also it's taking a walk or doing something that moves your body after every single meal, not just after dinner. I mean, dinner is definitely the most important meal, only because the average American has dinner as their biggest, heaviest meal. But there's nothing wrong with doing a quick 10-minute walk after breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And here's my trick for people who aren't able to actually take a walk. Maybe it's raining outside. Maybe they can't take a break and go outside during their workday. If you do 10 minutes of deep squats, that can actually help reduce your glucose by up to 50 points.
10 minutes of deep squats, you mean do squats for 10 minutes up and down, or do you mean sit in a squat for 10 minutes?
No, no, no. Up and down.
Okay, just to be clear, 10 minutes of doing squats would be quite the workout.
Well, you're going to do it at a pace that's comfortable for you, right?
Yeah.
You don't have to rush through it. So in 10 minutes, you could take your time, take a little break, but you're keeping your body in motion.
I get it. I get it. I exercise heavy.
Yes, you do.
And, like today I got a PR on my sumo deadlift, which I'm very excited about at 187 pounds. And I joke that like my derriere does not fail, but I think 10 minutes of squats, I might actually fail. I might be tired.
You know what?
The
If
point is to
someone
keep
tried to,
moving. The
well,
point
if
is to
someone
keep moving.
tried to do 10 minutes of a plank right now,
Oh my
they'd
God.
probably fail, right? But you start at 1 minute and then you gradually increase that. So maybe it takes a year for you to get up to 10 minutes of squats. But in the meantime, you're getting 3 to 5 minutes, which is going to be amazing for your sugars.
And I got to tell you, that will be the best Brazilian butt lift you ever get. Like, you don't need surgery.
Absolutely.
You do 10 minutes of squats multiple times a week, and you're going to you could drop a dime and it'll bounce off that. All right. Joelle on fitness. So, speaking of fiber, true or false, cancer survivors should avoid fruit because of sugar content.
I'm so glad that you're asking this question. Fruit is not the enemy, but we do know that there are ways to hack it. And so, first of all, I'm also going to encourage having fruit earlier in the day. I personally try not to have fruit after 4 p.m.
Okay.
Number two, which I feel is the most important thing, you're having fruit in its unaltered form, not in a juice, not in a smoothie, not dried fruit, the whole fruit, the way nature intended. But also, you're going to be smart about how you pair it. Don't have fruit by itself. When you have fruit by itself, especially on an empty stomach, it is dessert. But if you pair it with protein or fiber, now it's going to do such wonders for you. So, easy examples: berries and Greek yogurt, a pear and walnuts, an apple and a piece of cheddar cheese. It's not hard. Just don't have it by itself and have it earlier in the day.
And you said I can have cheese, which, somewhere I love cheese, and I've always been like, well, but is cheese safe? But if you have it with your fruit and you have it early, the fat can help.
Mm-hmm.
What is your advice for someone looking to kick cancer's ass through better glucose and hormone management?
It's to invest in a CGM. Even if you had to pay cash, the Stello, which is made from Dexcom, just to get the device itself, it's about $100. The sensors for 30 days is another $100. So with a $200 investment, and you could stop after 30 days, you'll get plenty of data after 30 days. A $200 investment is going to guide you for the rest of your life on what food, sleep, and stress does to your body.
Fantastic. Well, Dr. Hormone Hacker, it has been an absolute treasure trove of learning having you back on. How can people find out more about you and more about your work?
So they can always reach out and connect with me on my website, which is drhormonehacker.com. And I am also on Instagram under the same Dr. Hormone Hacker. On my Instagram and also on my YouTube channel, I have videos every single week on all topics having to do with hormones.
Great. And how's the book going, The Type 0 Diabetic? Where can people get their hands on that?
It is on Amazon, and I'm just so happy on a weekly basis, Joelle. I'm having people text me, I followed what I read in the Type 0 Diabetic, and I just went to my doctors. I'm no longer pre-diabetic. I mean, that's exactly what I wrote the book for.
That is awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us again. Please share this episode with someone who needs to understand the glucose cancer connection or is struggling with hormone decisions. We'll have all kinds of things in the show notes and bonus content at kcapodcast.com. Until next week, keep kicking cancer's ass.